All right, everybody. Welcome to the very exciting first session for our Writers Festival. Good afternoon, anybody who's out there virtually or here in the library. My name is Kelsey Wagner. On behalf of the Coquitlam Public Library, I would like to welcome you to the second annual Tri-Cities Writers Festival. Last year's inaugural festival was so successful, we were very pleased to be able to move it forward and expand it. So we've expanded our cocktail reception, our panel events, and pulled it from a 2-day event into a 4-day event, offering a lot more virtual and in-person sessions. We have a really great lineup of incredible authors and an addition of a lot of how to become an author kind of workshops and events. So I really recommend you check out the rest of the festival as it's coming out. We had our first event last night and are going to be moving forward with a jam-packed schedule for the next 3 days. And as this is the sort of first author event presented by us at the Coquitlam Public Library, I'm really pleased to be the person who gets to do this introduction and give a starting acknowledgement for our fantastic author. But before we get into the stuff that you're here for with Hannah, I would really like to take a moment, especially as we are both virtual from all over the place and in person, to do an acknowledgement of where I currently am and where the public library is. I would like to acknowledge with both gratitude and immense respect that the Coquitlam Public Library is on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coquitlam and Katzie First Nation. This is including areas that were traditionally part of the Coast Salish groups, but specifically Coquitlam is on the territory of the Hakwa-Minum word, meaning Coquitlam, which is the group that is still on this territory. The Hakakwan word, Coquitlam, means redfish up the river, and we thank them for their stewardship of the land, all that is above and below, and their continuing presence here since time immemorial. For the audience out here in person, please put your please put your questions virtually into the chat so I can ask our lovely author here. And if anybody is joining us in person downstairs, we should have a staff member there who can do the same thing. So please feel free to just ask questions and they will do so. I can't hear you if you're all the way downstairs. But you're not really here to hear me talk. I'm here to have a great conversation with Hannah Mary McKinnon, our awesome author here today. So as we get started, I'm going to hand it over to Hannah so that she can do a bit of her own introduction, as she would be the expert on herself. And then we can hear a little bit from one of her book sections. So Hannah, please tell the audience just a little bit about yourself. Make sure they're here in the right event.
And if you're not, don't leave, please stay.
Please do, it's worth it.
So first of all, thank you very, very, very much for the invitation to join you today. And anyone who's watching, thank you for tuning in. I really appreciate it. So my name is Hannah Mary McKinnon. I'm an author based in Oakville, Ontario. So although the accent kind of, gives it away, I'm sure I'm not originally from Canada, although I do have the Canadian nationality now for a long time. So I was originally born in the UK. I grew up in Switzerland and moved to Ontario in 2010. My husband, who's from New Brunswick, is the Canadian connection. I started writing books shortly after we came here, so it wasn't really on my radar. I had a big corporate career before, but I'm sure we'll get into those kinds of details. So I am the author of 11 novels, 3 romance, 2 more recent. 1 romance was my very first book, and 8 thrillers. So the last published thriller released thriller is Only One Survives, that came out in July last year, and A Killer Motive is my next one, which will release in September.
Yeah, so Hannah actually has the honor of our festival. I know you're so honored with our festival of being the furthest geographic author we are talking to today. One of the reasons we brought her in is because of, even here in BC, her immense popularity with her range of thrillers. So I am requesting that she read a little bit just to give a little taste of her most recent one, Only One Survives, which I did read recently and recommend. So, Hannah, would you like to give the people a little bit of why they should check out this book?
I'm
And I
I'm
mean check out because we do have it.
quite literally. So here's the cover. This is what it looks like. Only One Survives. We have a creepy cabin, right? Oh gosh, I can't do this the other way around. Right here. So let me give you the elevator pitch and then I'll jump straight into a little bit of the opening. So Only One Survives is the story of the all-female pop rock group called the Bittersweet. And as they're just on the precipice of success. They've released one song and they're really hitting the big time already. And there's a lot of buzz and excitement about this pop rock group. And on their way to an event in the Catskills during a snowstorm, there's a tragic car accident. There are 5 members of the band in the car, and there's a documentarian as well who is following them to make a documentary about what it's like to be in an up and coming band. One band member dies straight away, another is severely injured, and the 4 people that remain, along with the injured person, find refuge in an old cabin, old and creepy cabin, for the night in sub-zero temperatures and one of the worst storms that the region has ever seen. Come morning, there is 1 person of the band left. 1 is missing, 2 others have perished, and the documentarian is also alive. So the question is, what happened that night? What on earth went on? And did somebody decide that after that accident, the band was worth more dead than alive? So that is basically the elevator teaser pitch for Only One Survives. And I'll read you a little bit of the prologue. 42 days after the accident. Music lovers. I've guzzled 3 vats of coffee in record time. Could be why my mind's racing faster than a cheetah on steroids, but it's more likely from the shock of what went down with the Bittersweet today. After failing to process the news, I came here to write a blog post. It was either this or a bottle of gin. To be honest, I'm not sure either will help make sense of it all. If you've seen my recent posts, listened to my radio show What's on NYC, or visited my social media, you'll know I adore the Bittersweet, and you'll have read about my devastation after what happened to the band last month. Their accident was such an incredible, tragic loss. I've said this before, and it merits repeating. It was time another all-female pop rock group hit the scene. The Bittersweet, aka Vienna Taylor, Madison Pierce, Isabel Riotto, and sisters Gabby and Evelina Sevillano were the perfect blend of powerful women who sang, played instruments, and wrote their own tracks. In short, they were kick-ass. After watching them interact with each other and having interviewed them on my show, the best way to describe their relationship is united. They gelled, you know? You could tell this band would go the distance. I'd have bet anything they'd be around for decades. Thousands of us were heartbroken when the news broke about the car crash. Few details emerged at first, although we soon learned that after the single vehicle accident on an isolated stretch of road in the Catskills, they'd been stranded overnight at an abandoned cabin during a major snowstorm. Next came a report of fatalities. The fans, myself included, were freaking out, speculating about who had perished. Finally, the cops released pictures of Vienna and confirmed another person who'd been travelling with the Bittersweet had also survived. With the heaviest of hearts, we concluded Isabel, Gabby, Evelina, and Madison had died, until the cops confirmed Madison was, and to this day still is, missing. The police remained tight-lipped about the details, so naturally the whispers started. Words like crime scene, perpetrator, and investigations, as in plural, got thrown around. I figured it was nonsense. Clickbait for the gullible. No crime had been committed. I felt certain the accident would be ruled exactly that, an accident, after which we'd mourn the demise of one of the most exciting up-and-coming all-female bands in recent history. Seems I was wrong. In case you missed it this morning, Vienna was approached by the police at a public memorial service for Gabby and Evelina in Queens, taken in for questioning about their deaths. You read it right, and in this instance, I'm not the only one who thinks deaths is synonymous with murders.
Mm. Getting chills hearing that, even just having read the book. It's such a good
Thank you.
introduction to what is such a complicated story. And I would really like to talk in a little bit about sort of your process around coming up with such a thriller with its twists and turns. But I think, especially with our audience, what would be good heading into your writing process is to just talk a little bit about what makes you a writer, because there's always going to be a foundation in order to end up creating a book like that, right? So, you have quite a range of works. It's one of the reasons why we wanted to have you as part of the festival, like thriller and romance, but also very different romances and very different thrillers to each other. So, this is a question I'm sure you've been asked 1,000 times, but when did you first realize you wanted to try and be a writer? What was that inspiration behind the very first book?
So for anybody who's watching who thinks, oh, I can't do this, or I'm too old, or gosh, I don't know what. My first book was published when I was 45. So I remember somebody in their 20s saying, "Oh, I haven't been published yet. Is it too late for me?" I'm thinking, no. Recently Sue Hinsenberg's book that's doing extremely well and is really fun is called The Retirement Plan, and she's in her 60s and it's her first novel. So let me just frame that and leave that there. It's never too late. So my career specifically really started in my early 40s, my writing career. I had a long and very successful corporate career before that. I used to write in school, like so many. I love the creative writing process in school, and not essays particularly, but just the creative stuff, making up stories. And when I graduated school and did various, other things, corporate things, university and whatnot, I didn't write creatively. It was just something that I figured was something I used to do as a kid and used to love as a kid, but it wasn't sustainable as a career. It wasn't, I don't think I even ever thought I want to be a writer, because I was going to be a business owner. That was my big plan. Um, and so it wasn't until we came to Canada and I still had this big corporate career and we came here. So I left that job in any case, and I started my own business here, and it failed, that I found myself at a crossroads. And the crossroads was either continue on the corporate career, keep doing that, or try something else. And one of the reasons why we'd come to Canada was because my husband was a stay-at-home dad. We have three sons. We had twins the second time around, and we had them all in 16 months. So it was very short, very quick, very intense. And he was a stay-at-home dad. And for me, with the job that I had, I was CEO of an IT recruitment company, pan-European company. I was traveling a lot, very long hours, and there was just zero work-life balance. And my husband wanted to come back to Canada. So it was a moment for me to kind of reevaluate, which was why I decided to start this business. And it failed. And so I really had to think long and hard about what I wanted to do. And Rob, who is an absolute treasure, my husband, we've been married for a million years, 26 to be precise. But he asked me, if you could do anything, what would you do? Anything, anything. And I said, well, if I could do anything successfully, because I just failed at something, I don't like it. It hurt. It was very uncomfortable. I don't want to go through that again. If I put on if I go into dreamland, I used to love writing. I'd love to one day write a book. And he said, well, why don't you just try? And I said, because did you not hear me about the failing part? What if it doesn't work out? And he said, but you won't know if you don't try. And so I put on my big girl pants and tried, and here we are, 11 books later.
Yeah, that's such a great sort of concept of the people are always so we hear that a lot when we run especially workshops, this feeling like there's never going to be enough time to try things. But sometimes you got to just try it. And I got to tell you, I'm going to be fascinated for the day I have a conversation with a writer and they say they loved writing essays at school, because I will have a bit of a question about that. But then what's so interesting about sort of your writing journey is, even though authors do tend to dabble in a lot of genres, they tend to do subgenres. They look at what they like writing and then they branch off a bit from that. But it's kind of rare to have the opposite, almost opposite ends of the spectrum of genres. So, you started writing, and I believe your first book was a romance once
Correct.
upon a
Yes.
time, right? Um, so then what inspired you to immediately try writing a thriller?
Well, it's a little bit of a sad story, to be honest. So the first book, Time After Time, is basically it's a love letter to the movies Groundhog Day and Sliding Doors. That's really so I remember thinking that I wanted to write something, and this was one of the lightning in a bottle. The idea just it probably didn't just suddenly arrive. It had probably been in there somewhere, but I just hadn't accessed it yet. And I remember thinking of this idea and immediately writing the outline, and I didn't really know what I was doing. I was very naive, thinking, well, I read books, I love books, should be fine. And I wrote it, and eventually found an agent with it, and we sold it to HarperCollins UK. But in the process, or in the when I was what we call on sub, so when it was out with my agent and on submission, and it took me a few years in reworking the manuscript to get it to the point that an agent took me on, because the first version was not worthy. But anyway, so I was writing while I was on submission, both to agents and then subsequently via my agent to publishers. I was writing the next book. And I didn't know at this point whether Time After Time would sell. I had no idea. But I had another idea for The Neighbours, which became The Neighbours. It was called something else, but that was my first suspense novel. And I didn't really know what it was, but I knew it wasn't a romance. It was darker, it was grittier. Um, it wouldn't have a happy ending for everyone either. In a romance, you have to deliver a happy ending. It's it's not a romance if you don't, right? That's one of the
The
rules.
divining of the genre, yes.
Yes, that's the contract you make with your readers when you write a romance. There's a happy ending. But in this one, there wasn't. But I didn't really worry about it because I thought, well, I don't even know if Time After Time will sell. So right now, I'm just writing it for me. And the reason why it went darker and grittier was that I rediscovered my love of thrillers at the library, which was great. Best place on earth. So in my teen years, I used to read a ton of thrillers. Jonathan Kellerman and of course Stephen King and John Grisham and all kinds of things. My mum was my book dealer. She would give me books. And that was really all I used to read until my early 20s, when my best friend was murdered in very, very, very tragic and difficult circumstances. And his death really put an end to me reading violent stuff because I just couldn't deal with it. And so, fast forward 2 decades, I'm sitting at the library. I see this book called Creep by Jennifer Hillier, who's a Canadian author. And I found the cover really intriguing. So I just gravitated towards it. I still don't know why. It was calling my name. So I picked it up. I was waiting for one of my kids. I picked it up. I read the back of the book. I sat down. I read the first chapter and I was all in. So I read that one. I checked it out, took it home. I read that one. I read the sequel, Freak. I read The Butcher. That was her third one. And I didn't know Jenny at this time. And I remember reading them and thinking, this is why I used to love reading thrillers. And this, the darker stuff, is what I want to write. So her book, just like Rob, gave me, the gentle push and then not so gentle shove to come on, write something in the best possible way, and sweetest way. Jenny's books reignited the passion for thrillers, and in a way gave me, not permission, that's too strong of a word, but gave me the courage to go back to my love of thrillers and try my hand at writing something darker. And funnily enough, we met in person in 2017 at a conference. I coming down the escalator and I saw Jennifer Hillier, and I was, it's Jennifer Hillier. So I was all squeaky voiced, and oh my gosh, I've got a book coming out, and your books, they inspired me, and she said, oh, so do you live in England, or did you fly over from the UK? I said, no, I live in Oakville. And she said, shut up, so do I. We should go for coffee. And I died. And now we're really close friends, and it's such a fun story because it also actually highlights the wonderful, wonderful community that is the crime reading and writing community, which is just simply lovely. So so it has a bit of a sad origin story, but in the end, I know that this was what I guess I was always destined to write.
Well, and I think it's such a good dynamic building off of that really like very almost symmetrical story of your creation of these, because in order to write really good romances and really good thrillers, you need a really good understanding of people. You
Yes,
need to know how motives work, because if
yes,
you wash away the context of the happy end, people have motives regardless, right? And I think your books really managed to catch something about that in terms of why people are doing certain things that doesn't feel very artificial. It feels very nuanced in a way that is looking at people. So I would love to then talk a little bit about your writing process,
sure.
in terms of what kind of questions do you ask yourself when you're coming up with these? It seems like some of those early books, they were just in there waiting to be defined a bit. But as you've gone along with your bulk of work, what is the process that you have for writing them?
That's a great question, and thank you for the compliments too, because I do spend an awful lot of time thinking about my characters and their motivations. I'm not massively interested in, what knife did they use or what gun did they buy or whatever. That for me is why did they buy the gun? Why did they choose it? What made them pick up the knife? That it's the why that I'm that the more psychological, which is probably why I write. You can put my books in domestic thrillers or psychological thrillers and that general arena, firmly crime, but then there are different subsets, and they blend as well. So my process really, I've refined it, I guess. I'm in the world of writing what you call a plotter. So I outline my books. There are some people who don't outline ahead of time at all. There are some who outline heavily, and there are people who are somewhere in the middle, and everybody's a little bit different. And what works for one person doesn't work for another. So it's all very, very, it really depends on each writer. We all have our little ways or big ways, depending, of doing things differently. And so for me, the first thing that generally arrives typically is kind of a what if scenario, or, I might see something or hear something, or something that can be really lovely, and I twist it on its head and make it dark and evil if I'm working on a thriller. And so that's typically there's something that sparks a, oh, that's interesting. That's an interesting character. Or what are they doing? What are they afraid of? What's happening here? Or something I hear on the radio. I remember for Her Secret Son, I saw something while I was on the treadmill on a news report, and I can't say what it was, otherwise I'll give too much away, but it was a family dynamic that I found really interesting. I thought, wow, if that happened and I added this element, what else could happen? So my mind kind of starts spiraling, and very very quickly the characters, the people who will tell the story, take over. So I know relatively quickly whose story this will be, from whose point of view I'll be telling it. So then I really sit down and I always start with the beginning and the end. And I know that sounds really weird, because that means there's a whole lot of nothing in the middle. And that's exactly what it feels like. It's just soup. It's fog. I don't know. But I have a character and a situation at the beginning, And I think I have the same character, it has to be the same character if they're telling the story, and their situation at the end. So that gives me an arc, that gives me something to work towards. And then I'll break it down because 90,000 words is a lot to write. It's a lot of blank pages. So typically I break it down into about 15 plot points, the inciting incident and the midpoint twist and things like that. So big chunks, big things that I can drop on this character's journey. And then I have my little anchor point. So imagine stepping stone, or imagine building a bridge, You have a river, you've got to get across. You can see the other side is really far away and there might be some mist and fog, but you know where you're heading. And so you drop these big boulders so that you can then add in smaller ones so you can then walk from one to the other. So it's okay, so I have my inciting incident, and then I need to have, or the hook if you like, and then I have the inciting incident. How do I get from one to the next? So I think about, well, what are those steps? So I'll outline my novel in relative detail, but without every single plot twist, because that you might as well just write the whole thing. I mean, that's not going to happen. And at this point, I know my characters a little, but not too much. And I know the main ones more than the others that will just also pop up organically as I write. And I interview the main characters, those who are telling the stories, and perhaps those that are very close to them. And by interview, I mean I have a 3-page questionnaire that I put them through. So it'll be the typical things, what they look like and where they're from, those kinds of things. But then also more in-depth questions about have they seen a dead body? If yes, was it a grandparent or was it a murder victim? What were the circumstances? How much money do they have in their bank account right now? When were they their richest, their poorest? What kind of car do they drive? What languages do they speak? Um, are they spiritual or religious? Or, what's that background? Where did they go to uni? What did they study? How did they feel about that? Did they switch programs? So it's things like that not all of that by far will end up in the book, but it makes me really think about who they are because I do work really hard on trying to make these people as real as possible so that if they walked into the office, I'd be a little surprised, but yet not. I'd be a bit surprised because they're fictional, but not because they're fully formed humans to me. And so if I can make them fully fleshed, to me, hopefully I can convey a lot of that to the reader too. So once I've interviewed them, I'll probably build a little bit of a map, especially if I'm setting it somewhere real, so I know the distances between home and work and, is that realistic, that kind of thing. I don't do a ton of research before I start. I tend to put in placeholders as I'm writing because otherwise I might end up cutting stuff that is very interesting, but I'm not going to need. And once that is all done, once all that prep is done, oh, a photo gallery as well. I like having photographs of my cast that I Google hairstyles. So I don't use film stars. I find that too distracting. So I know who they are. I give them the name of my character underneath, and that is who they now are. No clue who these wonderful people are, but they smile down from my pinboard, and that's who they are. They become Vienna or however it might be. And then I start writing. So typically, after all that prep, I'll start writing. I'll do a chapter a day. So I write a chapter and I do a first pass edit. And that is my least favorite part because I've thought about the story so much. Why isn't it written already? And it's filling the blank pages. And it always feels clunky, even though I've prepared so much, it feels clunky and like the worst thing I've ever written. And this is messy and difficult. And I just remind myself, you've done this before. You always feel this way. And if I don't remind myself, Rob certainly will, because I always say to him, this is the worst thing I've ever written. And he says, yeah, yes, dear. Yes, dear. You say that every time. And then I go over the manuscript again and again and again, probably, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 times. And then I send that to my agent and editor and call it my first draft. Even though I've gone over it, between 8 and 10 times. And then the real work begins. That's when the edits, the in-house edits with the editor and making it the best book that it can possibly be begins.
Yeah, and I find that process so fascinating. Also, I just love the idea of you having like a police procedural detective style murder board of not murder people. Excellent.
I do, I've got one right here, right now.
Yeah, like I think that's just such a great way to visualize it. And I think what I'm really intrigued then by, because it really reflects in your writing, is character driven stories, not necessarily plot driven. Like the plot is the vehicle of getting the characters into the situations that you're describing. And it really comes across as that sort of fleshed out, interesting person. Because,
Oh, thank
I
you.
have a confession to make with your books. I wanted to read the full broad to make sure I could have this conversation. And I read The Christmas Wager basically begrudgingly because I'm not really much of a romance reader. I read a lot of horror, and I'm
Yeah.
especially not a Christmas reader. And I was hooked,
Oh, well,
honestly,
thank you.
because I think your characters are so interesting, and they're interesting in a not flat way. You really put in flaws and complicated elements that then
Yes.
really lend themselves. So reading them back to back, which I'm very curious if you ever have fans that are like, oh, I love both your romance and your thrillers, but especially reading them back to back, the combination is fascinating for your character development. And I definitely want to speak a bit about this, but we have a question that popped up that I do not want to forget.
Mm-hmm.
So, coming off of your sort of writing process, we have a question that is, do you ever get stuck? A classic. And kind of what is your general process to get unstuck from it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I get stuck. Absolutely. I might get stuck on the plot. I might get stuck on when I think I've outlined everything and then all of a sudden, uh-oh, this just doesn't seem to be working because even though I outline everything, I'm not married to the outline. So if my characters move in a slightly different direction, depending on how much they shift, I'd have to speak to my editor, of course, if they've acquired the book already. But I don't tell myself, oh no, this is what I have in the outline. They must do this. No, because sometimes as your subconscious or you're consciously ruminating over the story, you come up with ideas that are better. Then I follow them because if they're better, then it would be silly not to. So yes, I do get stuck. So I have a number of techniques that I've used. One is to write something else. So just maybe go and write, I don't know, a snippet of dialogue or even sometimes doing some graphics or something book related but still completely different allows my mind to think about subconsciously think about what's going on, but while I'm doing other things. And that could be true. It could be maybe I'm doing some graphics or maybe I'm doing, God forbid, some gardening. I'm not good at gardening. I pull out stuff I probably shouldn't and leave things I probably shouldn't. But anyway, um, or I'll go out for a walk. I'll just change the setting. Sometimes when I'm writing, changing the setting helps too. So I will draft in the spare bedroom on a laptop with a and shut the Wi-Fi connection off so I'm not, distracted by the internet. Or I might take a notepad and pen and go old school and go and just scribble notes because there's something about writing by hand that slows me down and can unblock. So that happens too. Or I might draw some terrible at drawing, but draw some diagrams or options or just do this mini self brainstorm of what could possibly happen to Stella. Oh, this, and this. Also, what I found is setting the timer for 20 minutes and just saying, I'm just going to write for 20 minutes and I'm not looking up until I've just done these 20 minutes. I will not answer the call of the cookie tin. I'm just going to sit here and write. That helps too. And I think one of the most genius pieces of advice that was given to me was if you're stuck on a scene or a chapter, skip ahead.
Mm.
Skip to another scene or another chapter or the end. If you think you know, and again, you might not be married to her, but if you think you know how the story ends and you're stuck right now, somewhere in the middle, go right at the end. Because a book does not need to be written in the order that it is read. And when I was told that, light bulbs went on in my head. I thought, oh my goodness, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And sometimes, even with an outline, I do that. I will be writing a chapter and yes, I'm happy with that. I come to the next one, I think, oh, I'm not sure that fits anymore. But I know the one after or the one after will fit. So I'm going to go and write that, and I'll leave a placeholder and I'll come and backfill. I have even been known to write the first chapter last because I couldn't get started. It just wasn't working. So I thought, you know what? Chapter one, forget it. I'll just write chapter two and I'll worry about chapter one later. And it worked. So hopefully that will answer the viewers' questions of some various
Yeah,
techniques.
and I think that is a great sort of summarization of the difference between, you're very much like a plotting out, outlining your story, but then also you got to let it breathe. You got to let it
Oh
find
yeah.
flexibility. I have a great question I'd like to ask you in that direction, but I do have a very fun one that came up from the audience in regards to your not murder board, which is how do you design, like, where do you get the images for your character gallery? Like, how do you figure out who's who?
So typically I'll have an idea of the age of the protagonist, or the antagonist. I'll know what they, because I've already thought about them and I've thought about the plot, and now I'm really getting into, well, who are they, and so I'll do this in conjunction when I do the questionnaire, what do they look like? I think, what do they look like? Do they have red hair? Do they have brown hair? Do they have short hair? What do they physically now look like? And I'll go and Google hairstyles, literally. I'll think, okay, so this character, Stella or Vienna, I'll take Vienna in Only One Survives. I knew she'd be in her early 20s. And I don't know if people remember the picture of the little girl with the fire in the background. So there's a fire behind her, there's a house burning behind her, and she's looking towards the camera with this smile, almost this look what I did. That's kind of what it looked like. And I remember thinking, I wonder what she might look like as an adult, because it's that mischievousness that I needed. And so I thought, okay, so somebody in their early 20s with dark hair, what might Vienna look like? And then I'll flick through, hairstyles, current hairstyles for women in their 20s. And then I'll flick through them. And often I'll flick through them, and then I'll go, that's her. That is my Vienna. So it's typically hairstyles.
Yeah, sort of building the person out from sort of how
Yeah,
you feel like they should feel like
yeah,
when you see
yeah.
them, which is a great one. So I wanted to ask about you're talking about the different ways you build up a story. And I noticed with reading, one of the most interesting things about The One Who Survives is that you use the story within a story element, which I find a very interesting writing technique because it seems like you'd have to do a lot of back writing to it. Is that a technique that you sort of use a lot, or how is it writing something like that?
Do you mean with the non-linear timeline,
Yeah,
or
kind of like the narration of something within the narration. So within that book, it's revealed at some point
no
that
spoilers?
you're reading basically a story that is a
Yes,
story within the story of the book,
yes, yes,
which is a very interesting technique that I think gets brought out in a lot of different kinds of books, but especially thrillers. So,
yes.
how did you find writing something like that? Did that feed into the waiting to write the last chapter kind of?
I don't think I haven't used that technique before, and I was very intrigued by it. Also in the book, there are, as I read from the prologue, as a blood, gosh, I can't speak. What do I do for a living? Words. Was a podcast, not a podcast, a blog post. That's the word I'm looking. I'm looking for. It was a blog post. And I also have radio interview transcripts, and I have newspaper articles. And that those were all things that I hadn't done before. But when I started outlining the book, I knew that that was what I needed to do because it just fit with the story, because it allowed me, even though this is Vienna's story, this is Vienna, the drummer of the Bittersweet, this was her story. I also needed there to be elements of the story that were not told by her. And with blog posts and the radio transcripts, they they push the story forward, but they also give clues if you compare them with, okay, so this is what Vienna is saying and thinking, but is that actually what's going on? Is that the public perception of what's going on? So there are social media comments in there as well, which is very deliberate because I wanted to demonstrate not only what fame can do, how destructive it can be, but also how destructive throwaway social media comments can be when we think, oh yeah, I'm just going to write this and nobody cares anyway. Well, maybe that's not quite true. So that these are all elements that fit the story, and I'm always trying to push myself with each book and do things that I haven't done before. So the Revenge List, this is my anger management group therapy exercise gone terribly wrong book. I have a female protagonist, a female angry protagonist. She's not angry for 350 pages. That would be exhausting for everyone, including me. And I wouldn't want to write that. So that's not the case. But it's dicey to write angry women, frankly. It's because angry women are not well perceived within society. So it was okay, can I pull this off? In Never Coming Home, I wrote the entire book from the antagonist's point of view, which is again a big ask to ask readers to come along for the ride and look at this story and go through this story through a murderer's point of view, you know. But it was something that fit the story. First of all, it fit the story. We were talking about characters and how to make them interesting. I was interested in those characters. I wanted to know who these people were and why they were the way, or why they were the way they were or are. And so I'm always trying to find these new elements. But first and foremost, they have to fit the story. Otherwise, they're shoehorned in. And or will feel like they're shoehorned in. And certainly with Only One Survives, the different narratives and techniques were in service of the story. That was how they really came to be.
Yeah, you know, playing around with that concept of the unreliable narrator versus the unreliable web, social media, other people, it
Yes.
definitely muddies the waters of trying to figure
Yes.
out as a reader what's going to happen, which is
That's right.
a thriller.
Exactly.
So kind of building off something I mentioned earlier about like, you're very well known for your thrillers, but you also probably have fans of the romance and sort of both genres.
Yeah.
We have a question from the audience saying that they're a huge fan of your thrillers because sometimes the baddies do win, which is the contrast, right, to the romance where it's like, gotta have a happy ending versus not. But then do you ever upset fans because of the dark endings?
Of course. I mean, you know, not everybody who reads my stories enjoys them, and nor would I expect everybody to, because that would be vastly unrealistic. Because I don't like everything I read or music I hear or movies I watch, and everybody brings their own experience. This is the other thing that's important. Everybody brings their own values and experience to reading a book, and you can't please everyone. That's just a fact. And so yes, there have been, not that I read my bad reviews. They sometimes find me, brackets, if everyone is perfectly entitled to leave a bad review, but just don't tag the author. It's bad form.
Just
Please
don't
don't do
feed the
that.
trolls. Just,
We don't need to, you
general
know,
good information. Don't
don't.
read the bad review.
Yeah, and don't tag the author. If you didn't like a book and you want to put a review out there, that's absolutely your right, and you should absolutely do so. But just don't tag the author, because then we will see it, and there's just no need for that. So because we know where they are if we want to find them. We know where to find them. Trust us, we know where to find them. Um, but yes, there are people who don't care for the evil people necessarily winning. Um, and I remember in one of my books, I won't reveal which one because it'll give too much away, but I remember in one of the books at the end, I wrote, the character says, "You were expecting a happy ending. Well, it is for me." Because the happy ending, it's the ending that this person, the antagonist, wanted, so they're happy. So I like endings that are unexpected. I like endings. I'm not a massive fan of ambiguous endings where I have to, unless it's a Chris Nolan movie, in which case it's fair game and I'll take anything that he makes. But I like endings that linger. That Gone Girl is a classic example of an ending of a book. I read it, over a decade ago, and I still wonder about those characters, and I still wonder who has killed who by now, because something was going to happen. So I love those kinds of endings. I think they're interesting and intriguing. Will I always have books, or do I always have books where the bad guy or woman wins? No, definitely not. It just again depends on what inspires me, the ending that I see, and what feels right for the story and the characters, to be honest.
Yeah, there's such an interesting dynamic around things like horror thriller with the bad side of things winning, because people say they love anti-heroes until what they are defining is basically just a hero with a slightly less good side to it. So I do think that's something very interesting about thrillers, is that especially your work is that playing around with that idea where it's like, well, are they actually the bad guy, or are they just the bad guy in the terms of the story, right?
Yes, exactly. Yes.
But then kind of feeding off of that concept around having to deal with what you are writing versus the public side of things, I did have a thought about, like, you have a fairly good sized bulk of work. And do you think your writing process, especially with your story design, has changed at all having gone through the publication side of things, especially from how you first published your books?
Oh yeah, I mean in terms of the plotting, it's way more refined for sure. I think for the last few books, it's more or less been the same process. What has changed, however, is the confidence. So I've learned to quiet this inner critic that's saying this is the worst thing you've ever written. Not always, it'll still come out, and I'll think, oh dear, it probably is. But I'm going to push through and it'll be fine. I'll just polish it. And I can look, I can look at the shelf behind me and go, you've done this before. It probably feels like rubbish. And if you sent it to your agent and editor now, they would say it is actually rubbish, but you're going to polish it up because you can't edit a blank page. So that has definitely changed. I also have a better understanding of the whole publishing process. I do have a good business head on my shoulders, which has helped. The whole agent or author agent publisher relationship was very clear to me from the offset, because it's very similar to candidate recruitment agency client relationships. It's the same tiered format. So I was able to understand that within moments. But I do have a better understanding of how things work in the publishing world, which is very helpful, because it is a business. I mean, publishers need to make money, or they can't publish more books. It's as simple as that. So I think there are a number of things that have changed, but fundamentally my process is very very constant, I'd say, for the last three or four, probably five books, I would say.
Yeah, gotten a little bit more streamlined as you're
Yeah,
coming
yeah,
up with your new things to try.
yep.
So, similar to that, I found it very interesting that the Christmas romances were written under a pseudonym, which is a tried and true classic of the general author sections in general. From a public library standpoint, little challenging trying to shelve pseudonym books, but
Uh,
what inspired the desire to write under a pseudonym for it? As I,
so
noticed your websites are linked for them too.
yes, yes, they are. Yes, they are. You can go from one to the other. So the reason for the pseudonym is it's two separate publishers. So I'm with HarperCollins Mira, HarperCollins for my thrillers, and then Putnam Penguin Viking imprint for my Christmas romantic comedies. And the reason, so that's only part of the reason though, because I still could have gone out with Hannah Mary McKinnon. But the idea really was not to hide that it's one and the same. It's the same author photograph in the bio. It says the same, it says I write thrillers, it says I write romantic comedies. But we really wanted to distinguish so that if I'm an auto buy for somebody in the thriller world and they go, oh, she's got a new book, and they purchase it and then they start wondering where the dead bodies are, that they're not, even though the cover would give it away, or they get the cover and think, wait, what is this? So, and vice versa. So that was really why we decided to have a pseudonym, not hidden, very transparent. Holly Cassidy, Hannah Mary McKinnon, one and the same. And some people, you was asking earlier about thriller readers and romance or readers, and many of them read both. Because we all, well, many of us read in across genres, and that's been really fun to be able to have people maybe who didn't know that Holly and Hannah are the same. They get to the back and they go, "Oh my gosh, I know her!" Oh, oh, it's actually McKinnon. I've got her thrillers, or the other way around. So that's been really fun too.
Yeah, and I do think it's one of the most interesting things about, especially you representing an author that does both genres, is when you do read them very similar, you can hear your sort of voice, like your tone, regardless of the material you're writing in, which I think, as I previously mentioned,
Yeah.
really feeds into that character-driven plot line to it. Um, so I'm going to ask you kind of a super classic interview question and one that's a little bit trickier. So my super classic one is, what is your current favorite book, or do you have one coming out, like one coming out soon you're excited for?
Do you mean one of mine or somebody else's?
So one that you like reading that's by a different author. Like,
Okay.
I
Okay.
would assume you know your own books very, very well.
I,
You don't
I, I
need to
do,
give us what
yeah.
your favorite one is, but
Oh
yeah,
no.
what
I
what are
don't I
you
don't
what are you
know.
currently reading that you enjoy?
So I'm currently reading Lisa Unger's Close Your Eyes and Count to 10, that published in February. So I'm just at the beginning of that one, and I'm really intrigued. I love Lisa. I think she's great. There's a little bit of a love letter to Lisa in the Revenge List. So anyone who picks that one up and knows Lisa, see if you can spot that. Well, you will spot it because it's pretty glaring. So I'm reading that one, and I'd recommend her books any day. They're fantastic. One of the one of the books that has lingered with me that I honestly wish I had would have been able to write. Honestly, if I'd come up with the idea, I might have discarded it because it seemed vastly complicated, and she's a genius. Is Wrong Place, Wrong Time by Gillian McAllister. So that book blew me away. Very, very briefly, the premise is a woman, it's about midnight, she's looking out the window, she sees her teenage son, 18, walking down the road. There's someone behind him. Her son turns around and kills the guy. So she witnesses her son, her teenage son, adult now because he's 18, committing a murder. Horrified, they go to the police station. He won't talk. Her and her husband go home. She wakes up the next morning and it's the day before the murder. And she's the only one who realizes this. And the next day she wakes up, she's completely confused. The next day she wakes up, it's the day before the murder. So she goes back in time to figure out what happened and why her son did this. And it is extraordinary. So that it's great. So it's honestly, it's flawless. It's such a perfect book.
It is very much a fascinating one. I've also read both the books you're talking about. And yeah, that concept about something that seems like would be a very cheesy sort of science fiction insert into what is traditionally very thriller writing is fascinating. And I
It's
think
brilliant.
it similarly grabs because it's all about the character. The sort of time aspect of it is just a vehicle to understand the characters
That's
better,
right. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because you're not you're spending months of time with them and yet only like 10 hours or something. So I think
Yeah.
that's a great recommendation and also a great exemplifier of why you like it in regards to how you write as well. So then my kind of flip version to that, a little bit trickier of a question, is sort of turning the interview back onto you. What is a question you wish you got asked more often? I feel like a lot of these interview questions tend to be kind of similar. So what's something you wish you could tell people more often?
Oh my gosh, that's a really tricky question because I've been doing this for so long now, and I honestly don't think there's anything where I've ever thought, oh, I wish people would ask me that. Why don't they ask me about that? Because honestly, I find that people who are leading these conversations, such as yourself, are always so well prepared, and always different questions. Of course, yes, there are some that are similar that would be recurring, about process or whatever. But honestly, off the top of my head, I can't think of something that a burning question that I think, oh, I wish. The one question I would love if somebody was in the room would be, can I make this into a movie immediately? That would be great. Or a
Yeah,
TV
you know
series.
what? I'm with you. I think that's a great one. Like, you know what? I got a little bit of info. Let's go right ahead with the broad motion picture to it, right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Sold. It doesn't happen that way, and a couple of things have been optioned, but yeah, it certainly wasn't in somebody in the audience going, "I must have this book for my production company." That would be great. That would be fun. Never
And
say never.
I do think thrillers are really interesting to try and adapt or not,
Yes.
right?
Oh
Because
yes.
you have to make sure you get the right emotion, which I think is such a driving point. It's the overarching thing that makes things like romance and thriller work is what is the emotion or tone of the story and how does it
Agreed.
grab the people who are uh, reading it, interacting with it, right? Well, since we're going to be wrapping up soon. We're sort of coming down to the end of our time already.
Already.
You have a new book coming out in September, right? Would you like to give us a real short little pitch about your new book that's going to be coming out?
I'd love to. So the new one is called A Killer Motive, and it publishes on September 9th. It's the story of Stella, who, when she was 22, took her almost 18-year-old brother to a beach party, even though he was grounded. She snuck him out of the house, her and her boyfriend. And during that party, he vanishes. Max just disappears into thin air. Fast forward 6 years, Stella's now 28. She runs a podcast called A Killer Motive. That's where the name comes from. It's a true crime podcast. And while she's promoting it on the radio, she says that if she had a single clue from anyone, anywhere, about what happened to Max, she would find him, she would bring him home, and she would find the perpetrator and bring them to justice. What she doesn't know is that somebody evil is listening to her every word. And a couple of days later, she gets an email challenging her to play a game. And if she successfully completes the game, she might get some information about Max.
Very intriguing. I love how your thriller premises are very different from each other,
Yes,
even though they have overarching relationship similarities.
thank
They
you.
each individual one has such a different premise. So even though they're all still suspense thrillers, it's always going to be a different experience every time. So if there are no more questions from the audience, I think I'm going to do my little exit blurb. So thank you so much, Hannah, for such a fantastic conversation. as I said, you're joining us the furthest away for the festival, and I really was so excited you were interested in it. Your broad body of work is so fascinating for its complexity dynamics, and we have, I believe, almost all of it in the library collection. I don't think we have your original romance printed in paper, but
Not in print, so
it's
you wouldn't
competing
know.
with about 1,100 other romances. The
Yeah.
thrillers, though, we definitely have all of those and the two newest romances. So
Thank you.
please, anybody who is watching and within the rough geographic boundaries of our library, please do check out some of the books and keep a heads out for Killer Motive when it comes out in September. As a library, I do have to advocate the side of we will have it to check out as opposed to purchase, but please, if you love it, go take a look too. For the rest of the festival, check out our website or the links on any of the posters for details on the other ones. And please consider submitting a short little feedback about how you enjoyed this too. Like maybe we'll have Hannah back at some point. So again, since nobody is here, I'm going to give you your own round of applause since I'm I'm the one watching you here. But just imagine this echoing.
Thank you. This has
there.
been lovely. Thank you.
Yeah, and I really appreciate this fantastic sort of starting session with us here as the Coquitlam Public Library for the festival. So everybody out there, go forth to the other sessions. You will probably see me. And one more just me applause for Hannah.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone watching, and good luck with the rest of the festival. I hope everyone has a fantastic time, which I'm sure they will.
Thank you so much, Hannah. So I'm going to be closing this meeting now, but thank you again.